So this dead woman surprises everyone when she shows up to her own funeral, alive. Now her name's Noella, and her husband is this guy, who we'll call B. And they've been together for about 10 years. But one day, B gets suspicious. He thinks Noella might be cheating on him and that she might leave him for another man. And no matter what B does, he just can't shake this feeling. So at this point, he has a couple of options. He can A, confront her, B, divorce her, or C, hire some hitmen to unalive her. And yeah, he's gonna go with option C. Now, Noella and B live in Melbourne, Australia, but sometimes she travels back home to her hometown in Burundi, Africa to visit. And B, he decides to have her executed there. So he calls up some goons he knows in Burundi, and he pays them the equivalent of $4,500, and he tells them the next time Noella comes into town, unalive her. And the goons are like, okay, cool. And then months go by and everything seems normal. But then one day, boom, Noella's stepmom passes away back in Burundi, and she has to fly back there to attend the funeral. So she flies there, goes to the funeral, and then after the funeral, she's at her hotel. And she's feeling kind of down because it was just a funeral, and she goes outside to get some fresh air. And that is when suddenly, out of nowhere, a man appears, and he comes straight at her, and he pulls out a pew-pew, and he points it at her, and he's like, if you scream, I'll shoot you. And then he makes her get into his car. And in the car, she's sitting between two other guys, and they both have pew-pews. And then they blindfold her, and they speed away. About 30 minutes later, the car stops and the kidnappers get out. And they take Noella into some kind of building and they tie her to a chair. And there is where this other guy comes out. We'll call him Leader. So Leader comes right up to Noella and he's like, what did you do to this man to make him want to unalive you? And Noella's like, what man? And Leader's like, your husband, dummy. Your husband paid us to unalive you. And Noella's like, my husband? B would never do that. And so Leader puts his phone on speaker and he dials B's number. And Leader's like, hey B, we have your wife. And then suddenly Noella hears B's voice on the line. And B's like, kill her. And this moment makes Noella's whole world come crashing down. And it's all just too much, and she eventually gets overwhelmed and she passes out. Sometime later, she wakes up, and she's still there, tied to a chair. And Leader, he comes over to her and he's like, okay, we've decided we're not gonna unalive you. We don't actually unalive women and children. And he also says that even though he's not gonna unalive her, he still plans on keeping B's money. He then calls B back and asks him for more money to finish the job. He asks for an extra, the equivalent of $2,200. And B's like, fine, I'll pay more, just do it. And eventually later, Leader tells B, okay, we did it, your wife is dead. And B pays him. He goes to Western Union and he wires him the money. And at this point, 2 days have gone by and Noella is still being held captive. But finally, Leader comes to her and he says, okay, I'm gonna let you go. And he gives her an envelope. And in that envelope is evidence, a cell phone memory card and a Western Union receipt for all the money he had received. And he wants Noella to use that evidence against B.